Hey there, this is your teacher, Mr. H, and you're watching History in a Hoodie. Today's episode is about foundations of government, where we will learn all about the significant parts of Georgia's Constitution. I can't wait to find out, so let's get this show started. What are we learning about today? The standard for today's lesson asks students to explain the basic structure of the Georgia State Constitution, as well as its relationship to the United States Constitution. Then we will explain separation of powers and checks and balances among Georgia's three branches of government. Finally, we will describe the rights and responsibilities of citizens according to the Georgia Constitution, list voting qualifications for elections in Georgia, and identify the three principles in the Pledge of Allegiance to the Georgia flag. Before we start, let's go over some vocabulary for today's lesson. Preamble is an introductory statement for a document. The Bill of Rights guarantees the freedoms written into the Constitution. Articles are sections of writing in the Georgia Constitution. An amendment is a change or an addition to the Constitution. Separation of powers means separating the powers of government into separate bodies of government. Checks and balances means balancing the influences of the government branches by allowing each branch to limit the others. A felony is a serious crime punishable by imprisonment for more than 1 year. The Georgia State Constitution has been rewritten several times throughout state history, a major one occurring after the Civil War, when the right to own slaves was removed from the document. The current Constitution was finished in 1983, just a few decades ago, and is the set of rules that all other laws written in our state must agree with. The Georgia Constitution is the supreme law of the state. However, don't forget that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the country and overrules anything in Georgia law that doesn't agree. The Georgia Constitution was written to mostly match up with the U.S. Constitution, in that it has three major sections: a preamble, articles to describe the role of government, and a Bill of Rights. The preamble is a short statement that describes the principles for which the state of Georgia stands. The Bill of Rights includes specifically granted rights to citizens that the government cannot take away. There also have been over 80 amendments to the Constitution since 1983, which, surprisingly, isn't the U.S. record for the most amendments to a state constitution. California holds that honor at over 500 amendments to their current constitution. The Articles of the Georgia Constitution set up three branches of state government: executive, legislative, and judicial, just like the federal government. The executive branch is headed by the governor and lieutenant governor, but also includes about a dozen offices and agencies that are directed by the governor to complete specific tasks. More than 100,000 people work for the executive branch, and all of their jobs, including the governor, is to execute laws. The legislative branch is a bicameral state legislature, the Georgia Assembly, which is set up like Congress, a state House of Representatives, and a state Senate. The 56 members of the Georgia Senate and 180 members of the Georgia House all write and pass laws for our state. Finally, the judicial branch includes the Georgia Supreme Court, the Georgia Court of Appeals, and several lower courts. Justices are elected or appointed to their positions, and their responsibility is to make rulings about individual infractions and determine whether state laws are constitutional or unconstitutional. In addition to the responsibilities of elected officials, the Georgia Constitution details the requirements for participating in voting for statewide elections. To participate in an election for governor, lieutenant governor, or the Georgia General Assembly, a voter must meet 5 requirements. Number 1, voters must be citizens of the United States. Number 2, voters must be 18 years old by election day. Number 3, voters must be a legal resident of Georgia and the county in which the person wants to vote. This is determined by voter identification cards, which can be obtained at the DMV when getting a driver's license, or by downloading a voter registration form online at the Georgia Secretary of State's website. Number 4, voters cannot be currently serving time in jail for felony offenses. And finally, number 5, voters cannot be ruled mentally incompetent. One final piece of knowledge from the Georgia Constitution is the Georgia Pledge of Allegiance. You didn't know that Georgia has its own pledge to the state flag in addition to the U.S. pledge, did you? That's because Georgia doesn't require by law that school children learn and recite the pledge every day alongside the U.S. pledge, like some states do. Here's looking at you, Texas. The Georgia pledge goes, I pledge allegiance to the Georgia flag and to the principles for which it stands, wisdom, justice, and moderation. Those three principles are found on the state seal, which is also on the current flag. So what? What are the significant ideas in the Georgia Constitution? As I noted before, the Georgia Constitution was based off the outline of the U.S. Constitution. There are some differences. For example, Georgia voters must approve all amendments, and the state must maintain a balanced budget. However, there are many important similarities. The Bill of Rights listing out specific privileges of citizens, executives having the power to veto laws, the bicameral legislature structure. But two of the most important similarities are the concepts of separation of powers and checks and balances. When the U.S. Constitution was written in the 1700s, the Founding Fathers were extremely concerned about one individual becoming all-powerful and ruling over the United States just like King George. To ensure it couldn't happen, they implemented separation of powers. The three main roles of government are, number 1, writing laws, number 2, enforcing laws, and number 3, judging laws. If one person had all three of these roles, they would essentially be a tyrant with limitless power. Both the federal constitution and our state constitution in Georgia separate those three roles into the three branches of government: legislative, writing laws; executive, enforcing laws; and judicial, judging laws. This way, not one person can make any law happen by his or herself. It takes at least the approval of the governor, a majority of the General Assembly, 118 out of 236 members, and a majority out of the state Supreme Court justices, 5 out of 9 justices, for any law to be effective. The second important concept of government is checks and balances. In addition to one person having too much power, the founders did not want one branch to have too much power. Each of the branches have a power to control the other two branches and are limited by the powers of the other two as well. The governor and the executive branch can veto laws passed by the legislative branch. The legislative branch can remove leaders of both the executive branch and judicial branch through the impeachment process. The judicial branch can nullify any laws passed in Georgia by declaring the law unconstitutional. These powers and more are outlined in the state constitution and guarantee that all of our state leaders are working to benefit the people of Georgia. Perhaps, though, the most significant part of the Georgia Constitution for you and your friends and families is the Georgia Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights is a listing of everything the government cannot do to you. Some of these rights will sound familiar because they are also from the U.S. Constitution, like freedom of religion, freedom of speech, the right to keep and bear arms, and the right to trial by jury. And then there are some rights that are special to Georgia as well. My favorite is, quote, the tradition of fishing and hunting and the taking of fish and wildlife shall be preserved for the people and shall be managed by law and regulation for the public good. Favorite, not because I like to fish and hunt, I don't, but because someone someday thought that fishing and hunting were going to be severely threatened enough that it needed to be written into the Constitution. With all these wonderful rights comes responsibilities, of course. Citizenship includes some responsibilities that are required by law, and some that are encouraged to be positive members of your community. You are required by law to pay your taxes owed, and to serve on juries for court cases when called. Though it isn't required by law, the most important responsibility of citizenship is voting in all elections, not just the exciting ones with presidential candidates. Volunteering to help support those in need in your community is also a responsibility of citizenship. Wow, so learning about Georgia's Constitution is really important for us to understand. I'm glad we learned it today. Are you ready for some review questions? What occurs when a Georgia law conflicts with the United States Constitution? The Georgia Constitution includes its own Bill of Rights that includes rules about hunting, fishing, and lottery games. Why did the authors of both the United States Constitution and the Georgia Constitution include a system of checks and balances? The branches of the federal and state governments are... What are the three principles in the Pledge of Allegiance to the Georgia flag? I hope all of you learned a lot from today's episode of History in a Hoodie about the foundations of Georgia's government. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Just kidding, I don't care about that stuff. But do make sure you study this lesson. Bye now.